So we have families that come to us at all parts in the process. So some families may come to us after they've been trying to adopt for several years. Some families might come to us just knowing they want to adopt and know nothing else. Some families maybe are somewhere in the middle. So we kind of meet them where they are. And education is one of our big things with RG. And we just love for our families to be educated and know exactly what's coming and what to expect and how to process certain things and know the right people to reach out to for that. So having a consultant can help direct you in the right way, whether that's who to lean on for your home study, who to reach out for support in learning more about exposure or how to finance your adoption or how to prepare for your visit with your expectant mom, what to do and what not to do at the hospital, all of those things. So really the teeny tiniest things to writing a letter, just helping them process that, to the really big things about how to be at the hospital and how to support an expectant mom while they're at the hospital. So really it could be anything, but it's kind of everything at the same time,
Yeah.
just being there.
Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through adoption, adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. In today's episode, I'm having a conversation with my teammate, RG Adoption Consulting's lead consultant, Rachel Patten. When she's not shaping the future of families or parenting her two children, Rachel indulges in her passion for health and wellness, embracing practices like transcendental meditation, learning about the latest therapeutic trends, and using essential oils in her everyday life. Rachel and her husband are fans of all things Bob Marley, and you will rarely find Rachel without her signature red lipstick. Rachel's expertise extends through the entire spectrum of adoption experiences, from supporting expectant moms in making informed adoption plans to helping hopeful parents navigate the journey to parenthood. As an adoptive mom herself, she deeply understands the nuances and emotional complexities of raising children touched by the trauma of adoption. Today, we delve into the invaluable lessons Rachel has gathered from her personal and professional life, exploring how these experiences have shaped her approach to supporting families and advocating for open adoptions. Rachel, welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I meant to put on red lipstick too to match yours, and I forgot, but I'll put on some gloss here.
Okay, that works.
I'm going to jump right in. You first started working with various adoption agencies. What were your roles there, and what are some takeaways you've learned having worked with expectant moms and birth moms?
Yeah, good question. It's been a journey since I've been doing this, I guess, close to 20 years now, as so much has changed from when I initially started until now, and with all the different roles as well. In fact, you're interviewing another person I worked for my very first adoption job later today as well. So that's fun. But I started as a caseworker. So when moms would travel to Utah, that were not from Utah, I would pick them up at the airport and take them grocery shopping, take them to doctor's appointments, really just be a good friend. I was really just there to kind of get to know them and just be a support person for them. So However, I started that job so that I could get into graduate school. I was looking for some social work experience, and I just kind of fell in love with it from day one. So, just working with the women, supporting them, seeing the backgrounds they came from, and just, what they had shouldered through in their life.
Mhm.
And just, I think I ended up being more of a social worker than a caseworker at that point, just because they were most comfortable with me. So I started doing the social work thing a little bit before I technically did. And then I moved into a social worker position, still working with expectant moms, but I started to work with our out of state expectant moms. So I was doing a lot of over the phone work. And then once they matched, I was also working with the families. So then I was kind of doing a combination where I started working with families. I definitely was used to just working with moms. So I think I always sided a little bit that way. But then when I started traveling and supporting both of them, which was a lot, and they don't do now, which is a good idea. But initially that's what I was doing. And I started to have a love for families too, especially when things kind of fell apart. And it's never a good day for someone, right? It's either the mom is very sad or the family's very sad. So it was a really hard job to balance that, because it wasn't like I got to be happy for whoever, right? Because I still had to be grieving with somebody else. And so I think that was a really rewarding job, just to kind of get the feel of everything and learn about both sides, but also a really hard job as well. So that's kind of how I started. And then I switched to working just solely with families, and I've been doing that ever since. So, worked with another agency supporting families through the process, and then I've been at RG for almost 6 years. So,
Amazing. And we're
yeah,
so
a
glad
little
to
bit of
have
everything.
you.
Thank you.
Were there any specific takeaways or things that really stuck with you about your work with the moms?
I think just seeing that perspective, right? I think if you've never gotten to know an expectant mom as she's going through this process and this decision, um, I learned a lot just about, the grief aspect of it. And then also just, um, I'm trying to think. I mean, the empathy, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
was huge. But I think just seeing that they were grieving either way, right? Like sometimes they chose to parent their child and they knew that it was going to be hard and they knew it was going to be tough, and they were in this difficult decision no matter what they chose, right? Like if they chose to parent, they knew that they likely didn't have the means and were
Mm-hmm.
coming from nothing. And then when they placed, of course, they were, grieving that loss as well. So truly, I saw a lot of grief on that side, regardless of what happened. Just trying to be moms and survive. A lot of them already had children. But yeah, I would say just the empathy for expectant moms, and the upbringing that a lot of them have come from, and continue to struggle to have some difficult times in their life. So that was
Yeah.
eye opening.
That grief reminds me, this morning I was at the gym and I have a good relationship with the manager at the gym, and we're always chit chatting. And um, she was having a particular hard day um, with managing some of her people. And I was like, yeah, managing is hard, especially if it's Rachel Patten. No, I'm kidding. Um, I was just relating with her on that and just giving her some advice that I think is good practice. And for the first time, she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I told her, and she has these two big dimples on either side of her face. And she smiled and she said, "Oh, I placed two of my children for adoption." And I said, "Oh, you're a birth mom." And she smiled again and said, "You get it." And then she said to me, "It was the hardest day of my life and the best day of my life." And it was so comforting for me to hear, as somebody who is always being scrutinized, right, from the adoptive parent side, um, about, some people think adoption is bad all the way around, and that um, birth moms were coerced or whatever. So to hear her say it was the hardest day of my life and the best day of my life, and I get to see them too. That's what she said. And she was genuinely happy about the fact that she had this option because she wasn't in a place to parent. And she's still, to this day, her kids are 21 and like 19 or something, thinks it was the best day of her life and the best decision she could have made. So
That's awesome to hear.
yeah, it was very comforting. And also at the same time, just really reiterates that sense of grief and that sense of loss and that sadness can also be had at the exact same time as joy and happiness and relief.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy juxtaposition around adoption. So now you're working with families as an adoption consultant. What's an adoption consultant and why should a family use one?
So, the way I always explain it is agencies are really there for expectant families. I think it's interesting because, of course, the families are paying all these fees and that's where the money comes from. But without these expectant moms, they don't have an agency. So, without maybe even deliberately doing that, I think that their focus is at least 80% on expectant moms. And so I think a consultant is really solely there for the family. It's nice to have someone on your side, someone who can step in and advocate for you, somebody who can just help you kind of walk through all the murky waters, right, that are coming your way, things you don't even know that you might experience. So having someone to just handhold you through the process, someone you know you can reach out to with any questions, big or small, at any point. And I really feel like we're just like a friend to the family in a sense. I think I end up being pretty close friends with most of my clients. And that's just because you have to trust each other. They have to trust in their consultant. And if you do so, I think they can be just an incredible resource for families that are going through this process. So I would say consultants are there for the families. Agencies are mostly there for expectant moms. So really two sides of the spectrum.
For sure. So
Yeah.
So what like can you talk a little bit about what consultants do and what consultants help families with?
Sure. So we have families that come to us through, well, at all parts in the process. So some families may come to us after they've been trying to adopt for several years. Some families might come to us just knowing they want to adopt and know nothing else. Some families maybe are somewhere in the middle. So we kind of meet them where they are. And education is one of our big things with RG. And we just love for our families to be educated and know exactly what's coming and what to expect and how to process certain things and know the right people to reach out to for that. So, so having a consultant can help direct you in the right way, whether that's who to lean on for your home study, who to reach out for support in learning more about exposure or how to finance your adoption or how to prepare for your visit with your expectant mom, what to do and what not to do at the hospital, all of those things. So really the teeny tiniest things to writing a letter, just helping them process that, to the really big things about how to be at the hospital and how to support an expectant mom while they're at the hospital. So really it could be anything, but it's kind of everything at the same time. Just being there.
So I'll play devil's advocate. So I know basically adoption consultants guide families through the entire process, breaking it down in a way that isn't so overwhelming too, because when you learn all of this stuff and you're like, oh my God, what do I do first? What do I do next? We really help put the blinders on so that they're focused just on one thing at a time. But why do you think a family, do you think it's better to work with a consultant? Obviously you do. Why do you think it's better to work with a consultant versus just work with an agency? Let's say there's an agency that, does a pretty good job at working with the families too and communicating with them. Why is it still a good idea to work with a consultant?
Because I would say consultant is somebody that's going to support you not only through it, but afterwards. However, I think just I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Consultants can give you more cases. I would say you're able to kind of put more feelers out at many different agencies, attorneys, different things like that. So hopefully by having a consultant, you're shortening your wait time in regards to placement, if possible. Not always, but hopefully. And then just having I think different clientele, different states, different all of that. So you're definitely, you have more eggs in your basket in a sense. I think that's a big reason people use consultants. Also, they just don't know where to start. Like, how do you choose an agency? How do you know that they're ethical? How do you know that they don't, I don't know, take your money and not do anything else? How do you know they have enough women that they're working with to take as many families as they have? How many placements have they done? I think families don't know the right questions typically to pick out an agency. And so choosing a consultant, I think, helps take the guesswork out of a lot of different areas of adoption, especially when it comes to agencies. I think most people have researched some agencies when they come to us, but they just don't know how to choose the right one, or who is the right one, or what's the right one. So I think that's a really good resource for families as well, to know where to start.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You said families, a lot of the reason families use a consultant is to have a wider network, right? Of seeing more situations than maybe they would if they went to one agency. And while I think that's true that most families come to us thinking that's what they're coming to us for, I think by the end of the process, they leave saying, oh my God, I don't know how I would have gotten through this process without you, because it was so much more than just getting other adoption situations or knowing which agencies to sign up with. There's so much support and guidance from people who really are experts in the industry, because as consultants, we see what's happening across the country instead of at just one agency. And
Mm-hmm.
so we can guide them in the right directions and provide the right supports. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we hear that a lot from clients,
mhm.
is they just don't know how they would have got through it, or how they would have chosen or done anything. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think they come to us for one reason and walk away knowing that it was for multiple reasons that they ended up choosing a consultant.
Yeah. So you've worked with a ton of families over your career. What makes a good client to work with, a good family to work with? Be honest.
I think trust is the number one thing that families need to be open to, because I think if families can come to us trusting that we know how to guide them, their journey is going to be a lot easier. But families that have a lot of pushback and question every little thing that you're trying to help them with, that's very difficult to navigate. And I think those families end up not adopting in the amount of time that they would like to. So it takes a lot longer, I think, if you're pushing against the process. So trust, I think, is key. And then, gosh, well, I mean, clients that come to us that are open as far as like what they want to be a parent, right? They don't necessarily care about race or gender or age or exposure or whatever. I mean, those clients are gonna move through the process a lot quicker. I think, however, I've learned there was a point where it was really hard for me to work with families who maybe weren't open to race or something like that, especially being a transracial family. So my husband and I are both Caucasian, both of our children are African American. And at first, it was kind of hard to work with families that weren't open to African American cases. And now, like, I actually really value that they can say that. I think it's really important for them to know sort of their limits, and like, if they're able to adopt a child that's outside of their race, will they have the resources? Will they have the support? Will there be other people around, mirrors for them, for their children, that sort of thing? So I actually really think I think it's actually great now that people can speak up and say, like, I just don't think we're the right fit for that. And so I feel like that's actually a great client to know, like, what are their limits? What can they take on? So initially I would have liked families to be open to everything. And now I think it's really important for them to really, truly think about it and know what they're able to do as far as parenting goes and who they're able to support. Um, so openness, I think, is great, but trust is amazing. I mean, excitement helps. I
Yeah.
think just then they respond quickly and they're excited and they want to share things with you and they want you to be a part of it. The more excited they get, the more excited we get, and the more we want to really just, interact with them and help them through the process. So people that are hard to get a hold of and you feel like you're constantly bothering them to adopt a baby is really frustrating. So I think maybe people that aren't quite ready jump in a little bit too soon. Um, So just being ready to hit it 100%, because I don't think people realize how quickly it can happen for them when they work with consultants.
Yeah.
They come to us thinking like it'll be a year or so, and some people, are active and matched within a week. So you just never know. So I think coming to us ready to go and just ready to be excited and just jump in with both feet is
Yeah.
really
And ready to
important.
go doesn't mean having a home study yet necessarily. It
Mm-hmm.
just means like emotionally, financially,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mentally, you're
ready,
there.
mentally, you're there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say communication. The
Mm-hmm.
more you communicate with your consultant, and I guess, I don't know, I'm sure different consultants work differently than us, but we say the more you text us and contact us, the better, because then you'll feel more supported, right? The more they contact us, the more supported they feel, instead of just waiting for us to contact them all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so let's flip it. And we've touched on some of them. What tends to make a client difficult to work with? And how do you navigate those challenges? And you touched
Yeah.
upon some, but
Um, it's interesting, but I would say, correct me if you think this is wrong, but I think a majority of our clients probably are type A personalities, it seems like. So I
mm-hmm.
think it's really hard for them to just let go and trust the process. You're used to controlling everything. You want to know what's going to come. You want to know everything before it happens. And there's just not a lot of control in adoption. So I think that for people that are really, really just type A and like to have that control, it's really hard to work with those families. I think most families are, and then they kind of learn to let go a little bit and just kind of go with the flow. And those people do well. The people that really still try to hold tight to those reins and want to control everything, it really just makes their process so much harder. It makes my job harder. It makes their job harder. For instance, and that can happen in all areas, right, of the process. So, I mean, it can start with the home study, it can roll into the profile book, which is hard for everybody. And then coming to, cases, and they want to control what they're getting, when, and what they look like, and why they don't have all this information. And it really can carry over to everything. So I think really controlling clients can be the most difficult to work with. They lack the trust and want the control. I think those are the two things that if you can trust your consultant and you trust the people you're working with and you feel like you're in good hands and you can let go of wanting to control everything, your process will go a lot more smoothly.
It's like when you start a new job, the more coachable you are,
Mm-hmm.
the easier time you'll have and the more feedback you'll get. And we always tell people, I always tell people before they join RG Adoption Consulting, that the one thing we require of every single person we work with is to go in with an open heart and an open mind, because where you are today might not be where you are in a month from now if you allow that. If you
Mm-hmm.
allow yourself to continue learning and understanding and let your heart be open and your mind be open. Um, I think that's a really good one. And I think also part of that is a sense of entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, that was another thing I was going to say that makes a good client is empathy, right? So just kind of putting themselves in the shoes of an expectant family and what that looks like. And I think um, some families will kind of forget what the other side looks like, right? So they jump in it, they want this baby, and they don't think about the expectant family and what they're going through, and they're lacking the empathy. And I think yeah, the sense of entitlement, meaning like they should be able to choose exactly what they want, when they want it, where they want it from. And, maybe they're not open to having a relationship with the expectant mom and they really just want this baby and then to kind of wash their hands and be done. Like, this is our baby and we're done. So it's such a disservice, I think, for their child to go into it that way and to continue to go through the process that way. And I do think that it will backfire on them eventually with their children. So I think really shaking the sense of entitlement would be a huge thing to do because otherwise there will be a lot of regrets if you are, trying to control and don't understand what the other side's going through. I think expectant moms go through so much more than adoptive families realize. And the process, I think families think, oh, they're getting their bills paid and they're, this and that, and they're being taken care of. And so they're fine, but we forget about everything else that's going in their lives. Again, a lot of these women came from foster care and they didn't get the love and support throughout their lives. And actually, sometimes being in the adoption process is the one time in their life that they're actually getting their needs met. So I think a lot of times when women are asking for more things or more this or more that, I think families start to get bothered by that. Of course, that's hard because you're fronting the bill, but at the same time, for once in their life, they're asking for things and actually getting things that they need to help support them through this process. So I think we forget about that sometimes as families. And we realize that there's a loss that they'll deal with forever. Recently, we had some fall throughs around the holidays, and when you think about it, if they were to place a baby around the holidays, that's a constant reminder during the holidays too, right? So this family that's blessed with this baby for Thanksgiving, and it's the best gift ever. Now every Thanksgiving, that expectant mom is feeling the loss of that baby she placed. So I think we don't think about the flip side as often, and I think there is that sense of entitlement until we can really dig deep into what they're going through as well. Feel that side of it.
I love that you talked about the fact that this might be the one time that they feel empowered in their life. Yeah, I don't think people think about that very often, including me, and we do this all the time. So when you do have a client like you're describing, not very open, has a sense of entitlement, is coming in maybe feeling bitter against birth moms or expectant moms, how do you navigate those challenges?
Yeah, it kind of depends, I guess, on the client. It varies quite a bit, but I do try to share a lot of my experience if they're willing to hear it, just so that they can kind of see what the other side looks like, as far as like our open adoptions and just support with expectant moms and what that side looks like. So I try to share just personally a lot of my story, if they're willing to hear it. And sometimes, honestly, like I have to just sort of let go as well until they're able to circle back, right? There comes a point where I try to rein them in, rein them in, rein them in. And at some point, it's not really working. And if I'm working harder than they're working, then it's not working, right? So then at that point, I have to be like, I can say, like, these are some things I feel like would be really good for you to listen to or to be a part of this education class, or, giving different resources that I think could be helpful, and hope that they'll take advantage of that. But sometimes they're just not ready. And sometimes I have to let go a little bit and wait for them to come back when they're ready. So I think that's part of when I say, if they come to us ready, things are going to go a lot more smoothly. Sometimes people think they're ready and then they jump on and they're not ready. So I think it just depends. But I try to coach them and give them as much as I can to help support them through the process. But there are some clients where I have to just kind of back off a little bit until they reach back out and they're ready to go instead of chasing them.
You're so right. We can't be more ready than they are. That's so true. I have noticed that from time to time as well. Like we're putting in all this effort to make it happen for them. We're guiding them into what we know works for them to do. And then, there's a lot of families who will just wait and not take our advice as to what to do to help move the process along. They feel like it should come to them. And why aren't they being picked by what they are looking for? And when I push back and say, well, have you done all these things that we have suggested for you to do? Typically not. Or if they are, it's an afterthought. I think that going through the adoption process, you have to be very intentional. And it takes a lot of your emotions, your finances, everything. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because this is reminding me of a conversation I recently had. What are your thoughts about going through the infertility process and the adoption process at the same time?
Personally, I think that's difficult because there's still a chance of the loss with your fertility journey. And I think grieving those losses and then also trying to process and have joy for a possible match and to be there to, support an expectant mom who is pregnant with a child when you've lost a child. I think you really have to process your losses, or even just the end of that journey, to be able to successfully move forward and give it 100%. So I'm sure there's people that can do both. I think in order to do it well, however, to do the adoption process well, I think having worked through your grief and kind of closing a chapter to move on to the next chapter is best case scenario. And I know not everyone does it that way, but I just think it's a lot. It's a lot to put on somebody. Adoption alone without any fertility, anything, right, is a lot. So I think adding those, they both have carry so much weight. And I think to try to navigate both, it's very difficult. So I would advise against it, but to each their own. I just think that if you jump into something, you should jump in 100% and really just kind of, that should be your focus. And I think it's hard for expectant moms to know that too. And I know we've had families that have gotten pregnant and adopted, as well. So it does happen. But I do think it's more tricky. It's trickier to give your expectant mom or your expectant family your focus when you're also navigating maybe, a risky pregnancy or a possibility of pregnancy. I think you can emotionally give 100% to the adoption journey if you're navigating both. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And what I often tell people, each journey deserves your full 100% focus. And at the same time, I totally understand why a family would want to do both at the same time, especially if they've been trying to get pregnant for a long time, that they just want to know that there's another option. But the thing is, adoption deserves more than, if this doesn't work, then we always have this. There's so much that goes on, but I think it's hard for people to understand or see until they're in it. So when we do have, I also think that, most of the time when we get families that insist that they can do both, and they've already in their mind understand that they're not going to get pregnant, even though they're trying. So they still want to, and that we know that that's still their first choice. Even when they do both at the same time, typically what happens, whether they get pregnant or they don't, when they get pregnant, they typically ghost us, or when they're done and they're not pregnant, they typically ghost us because either they want to wait until the first trimester to tell anyone, or they need time to grieve. And so many times they don't come back to adoption. And so, which is fine. Again, if you haven't matched yet and nobody else has been brought into that, you spend a lot of money though, and you could possibly waste a lot of money or lose a lot of money. Again, some people understand that. If people really think that they want to do both, and I'm never going to say no, it's up to them, but I'll always say, here are the pros and cons. Pay in installments if you have that option, so that you're not paying in full for something that you might not see through.
That's I think you're right. I do think that's why people disappear a lot of times, as they're going through that grief. And honestly, like, if they could just be open with us, we can help support them through that grief too, and lead them, to the right resources. We have counselors they can turn to, and different people that they could work with to help process that and move through it more quickly as well. But yeah, I think sometimes they just don't want to throw that in the mix and be in trouble with us, right? If they are trying to get at the same time, or do get pregnant at the same time. So, but yeah,
you
I
won't
think
get in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Just
be open.
let us know.
That's what I say. Just tell. And actually, we started a new thing in our agreement. We put in a new thing into our agreement saying, giving families a little bit of grace. If you do become pregnant, then we're going to let you put your account on hold for a year to see if you want to come back. afterwards or if things don't work out. So we put that in place in hopes that people would decide to just tell us instead of
Mhm.
ghost us, because we hate that. Like, we want to support you wherever you're at. We want to
Mhm.
just support you in becoming a parent if that's what you're hoping to do, which you are.
Yeah. And I think you and I are a little bit more crazy that way, in that like we do truly want all our clients to like
Mm-hmm.
adopt, and when they disappear you're like, what happened? Like you can't,
Come
it's
back.
hard to just turn the page, like tell
Mm-hmm.
us what happened, how can we support you, even if it's wrapping up. It's just, it's nice to know like that they're successful in some way, or else just they're okay being done too. It's just nice to
Right.
wrap up that package and tie the bow, I think. So
Right.
yeah,
Don't
just let us
sit there on the
know.
fence by yourself.
Yes.
Get the
Yes.
support you
Even if
need.
you want to sit on the fence, we'll sit with you. We just want to know you're on the fence. So,
Right. Good point. All right. We talked a little bit about entitlement, and privilege may or may not fall into that. And I'm talking about privilege mostly having to do with money.
Mm.
How have you observed privilege, or it could be white privilege too, which is very prevalent in adoption. But how have you observed privilege with families? Before we go on, I'm going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We have so much more to cover. Shopping for the right hair and skincare products can be tough, especially for multicultural or transracial families. That's exactly why Kate Shanahan created Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. When Kate and her husband adopted their daughter, she realized that caring for her melanin-rich skin and beautiful curls was essential to raising a confident girl. And as a cancer survivor herself, chemical-free ingredients were a must. She wanted one place with safe, natural products for her whole family, plus education and resources for families like hers. Now you can find it all at Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. Just visit sweetpeachtree.com, and because you're a listener of the Adoption Roadmap podcast, if you use code ROADMAP10, you'll get 10% off your first order. Sweetpeachtree.com with the code ROADMAP10 for 10% off your first order. Sweet Peachtree, celebrating every curl, every shade, every family. We talked a little bit about entitlement, and privilege may or may not fall into that. And I'm talking about privilege mostly having to do with money. How have you observed privilege, or it could be white privilege too, which is very prevalent in adoption. But how have you observed privilege with families?
Hmm. Well, I mean, honestly, I feel like we have the best clients, so I don't feel like I have to deal with that as much as you would think.
We
But
tend
I
to
do
have
think
pretty down to earth people,
we
which
do,
I love.
we do,
Yeah.
which is great. But privilege comes with, well, I'm paying for this and that, so I should have this and that, and I should have a
Mm-hmm.
say if she, gets her car fixed or not because I'm paying for it, and I'm just reflecting to possible bills for an expectant mom. But I think it comes back to that control a little bit too. The privilege and the control really kind of tie in a little bit, but gosh, it's hard. It can come in so many different ways, but and people don't always even realize that they're acting that way in a privileged way. But I think just expecting certain things, like we're paying this much money so we should be able to have a healthy white baby, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And not even saying it, but saying it without saying it is usually what happens. That's the biggest way I think I see the privilege is. um, Also, I think people forget that I laugh because when we first adopted my grandma, my grandparents were not supportive of us adopting outside of our race, and they grew up in the South, and I remember as a little girl just seeing racism everywhere as a little girl, and so that was normal to them. So they really were not happy that we were adopting outside of our race. But my grandma would always say, why don't you just wait for a doctor's baby? And I'd be like,
I
okay,
don't think that's how
like, because
adoption works,
doctors
Grandma.
are placing their babies for adoption all the time, right? So it was just so funny. Like um, just the concept, to some people is like, there's going to be this perfect child and this perfect family that's going to place this baby. But we forget that, the reason these women are not parenting their children is because they don't come from the greatest backgrounds. They don't have stability. They don't have great jobs. They don't have all the resources that these families have, or they would be parenting their children, right? They don't want to place their children for adoption. They're doing it because they want more for their children. They're doing it because they want more for the children they're already parenting. And I think families forget that. They think they're just like them and they're placing this baby and we should be able to control this or that or whatever. So that's the biggest piece I think I see. Is in the area of, and again, just, the lack of empathy and support for the expectant family, and just the unknowns that they don't really realize the backgrounds that these women come from. And they want this perfectly healthy baby, but these women are barely making it day to day. And sometimes, taking pills is how they make it to the next day and how they get through. And of course, none of us want our babies to be exposed to, any drugs or alcohol or even cigarettes, right? But we don't get to choose that. That's not for us to choose. And if smoking a pack of cigarettes a day gets her to the next day and gets her through that pregnancy, then so be it, right? We don't know. We don't know what her day looks like. So,
Yeah.
I think that's where I notice it the most, is just wanting the things that we can't always have.
Right. And speaking of cigarettes, by the way, if you're not open to cigarette smoking, please don't adopt. Like, I'll just say that because it's so prevalent. I have had conversations with people that have said pretty much we're not worried about getting picked. We have a lot of money, we live in a big house, we have nice things. We can provide anything for a child. And it always makes me cringe a little bit. And then on the flip side, I had clients who were very down to earth. They happen to have a lot of money, and they asked me sincerely. They said, "This is going to sound really bad, but does our money play into, like, will that help at all?" And they were serious, and I thought, you know what, that is a good question. And the answer is yes and no. Number one, an expectant mom is not going to choose you because they're seeing that you live in a big fancy house and they can see in your profile that you have a lot of money. In fact, probably the opposite, at least in a lot of situations, because they so can't relate to that at all. And they don't want to see perfection. They want to see real. And on the other hand, with the cost of adoption rising so much, we've seen situations anywhere from 35,000 to 85,000 or more. Money could help in that way. It will open you up to seeing more situations. That doesn't always mean you should pay all that money for an adoption situation. In fact, I have a really hard time with all of that. But it could afford you more situations than maybe other people could afford. But money isn't going to buy you a baby.
Right. And I think that that kind of makes me think about profile books too. So like you said, just showing off your fancy life and your big house, and people think that's going to get them chosen. And not to say that maybe that's not important to some expectant moms. Maybe someone does choose that for that reason. It's possible, but I think it's less likely. But what I have noticed is that entitlement comes across quite a bit in text in the profile book. The way things are phrased and how we speak. Sometimes we don't realize that bleeds entitlement. And I think just reading so many profile books and just been, have done this for so long that I can kind of pick out those little things. And again, I don't think it's necessarily intentional, but some of it can be, right? They want expectant families to know that their child will have everything, right? Anything they want to do, anything they want to try, that they're going to be able to do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing to put. And I think that's great. It's great for these children to have those opportunities. But sometimes just reading that and realizing that you're speaking to somebody who never had anything and never got to try anything, that's a big jump. And there's a big gap between the two of you. And so coming together and connecting is less likely, right? To, well, I don't know anything about a life like that. Like, I just can't even fathom placing my child in a family where, they never have to worry about anything or whatever. I'm just thinking like it's a big jump from where they are to where some of these families are. And that sometimes feels uncomfortable too, to an expectant family.
Yeah. And that has to go. You talked about the way your language comes across, right?
Mm-hmm.
That really trickles down to the team that you're working with too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this goes with the harder people to work with, right? If you have a bad attitude, like check that attitude at the door and show up, you know, you are working with people to help you become a mom or a dad. Those people, when somebody thinks of who is a mom or a dad, they're thinking about compassion, compassionate people, loving people, kind people, giving and generous people. Be that person that you want an expectant mom to believe you are, and I'm sure you are, but be that person to all the people on your team that are trying to help you get there.
Right.
Don't be the person that your true colors come out when things aren't going your way, right? We want to see that your true colors, you can still be upset and lose a little hope or be down or be sad or be angry and still be that loving, compassionate person that's just a little hurt or
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's
also
really important.
and I think come into this process knowing that there's going to be those times, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, sometimes you do get screwed over and it's money and it's emotional and it's all the things, right? And we try to protect you at all costs and hope that that doesn't happen, but it does happen. And what are you going to do when it happens? How are you going to respond to that? Because the people you work with aren't going to want to work with you and continue to place a baby with you if you're throwing a fit, if you're throwing a temper tantrum.
Right.
When the next baby's born, they're not going to reach out to you because of the way you acted. So, and again, I mean, it comes to, compassion as well. But if a woman changes her mind and wants to parent her child, that's her right. She's a mom. She carried that baby for 9 months, regardless of what her plans were. It can change, right? So how are you going to treat her when she decides, I want to keep my baby? You know,
Yeah.
she grew this baby. She loves this baby. She wants to parent this baby. So how are you going to respond to that? And I've seen so many times where moms will take a baby home and parent, and then they can't make it, and they'll reach back out to a family, but not if a family flips out when they decide they're going to parent, or not if they share unkind words when they decide. It's how you react is really going to ultimately determine your journey and
Yeah.
how smoothly it goes for you.
Just know that the team that you put in place um, is there to support you. We're on your team, literally. So, based on your professional experience, can you share some best practices for families going through the adoption process so that they are the most prepared and informed that they can be?
Yeah, I mean, we fall back on that education piece, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think just learning as much as you can about everything you can. And we have all those resources, but it's also okay to listen to all the podcasts and to read all the books and to learn and talk to people. I think speaking to people, adoptees and adoptive families, and we really try to create a sense of community so that our families can talk amongst themselves and support each
Yeah.
other. You and I have been through the process, but it's been a decade, over a decade. So I think it's really nice to have those people that have been through it right before you talk to them, ask questions. Yeah, just really put yourself out there. And I think we always say, it's people will kind of eat you alive if you ask the wrong questions or say the wrong words. And so having a sense of community where you know that you'll be corrected, but it'll be in a genuine, nice way, right? So that you learn and then you say the right word the next time, is I think something that's so important, because if you go online and you start asking questions in the wrong places on Facebook, you will get eaten up, and you will want to just be done and unplug and not, be
Mm-hmm.
online anymore, because people will eat you alive for saying the wrong thing. So I think just jumping into a community, having the support, making sure you're around people that support you, um, and a consultant's perfect way to do that. And education, just making sure that you're continuing to learn even after you adopt. It's a continual process. So once you adopt, I know, Becca, you always say this, but your journey just is starting, right? So now you're navigating a whole different side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the awesome part about consulting, is that you're still in our family, and you still get to reach out with questions or concerns, and we still can support you with resources in the future when you're
Mm-hmm.
struggling with this or that with your child. So
Yeah. And at the
yeah.
very least, like I know every consultant out there that I know provides education. And I think most of them provide a community too. And those are safe communities for you because
Mhm.
your consultant is watching, they know the people that they've worked with.
Mhm.
So join those. Don't think that you can do this process alone and feel like, yeah, I don't need community. My consultant will tell us everything we need to know. Rachel's right. Yeah, we went through it 10 years ago and we walk through it with people every day. But this community is people who are walking through it with you, who are experiencing it with you, or who have just experienced it. Don't try to do this alone. And if education, there's a ton out there. If that becomes too overwhelming, again, every consultant I know provides education. Don't think, oh, I don't need to go to that webinar tonight. I don't need to watch the video that they're telling me and encouraging me to watch. We're encouraging it and we're providing it for a reason. It's not because we wish you would know this stuff. It's because you have to know this stuff. Like it's that we do know because we are ahead of you in the process. So trust in your team again, and immerse yourself in the community and the sense of learning because it's a lifelong process.
Even
Okay.
agencies now, right,
Oh,
would rather you be working with a consultant
yes,
because they know you're going
that's
to be
true.
supported and educated and all of that. So even agencies are recognizing the importance of a
Yeah.
consultant.
Yeah, there are some agencies that won't work with you unless you're working with a consultant, and some
Hmm.
agencies that don't even keep a list of families because they know they can just reach out to the consultants that they trust. So they like when you are educated. In fact, that is the number one thing when I have asked agencies who makes the best clients, they say educated and supported clients,
Hmm.
people who know this
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Um, all right, now we're going to go a little more personal
Okay.
because you've adopted 2 times. So,
Hmm.
how did those 2 adoptions differ, and how do your own kids navigate these differences?
Well, yeah, this is a fun topic because I do have families that come back and want things to be exactly the same way,
Mm.
right, for the second time around, and that's really hard. So we do actually have a lot of similarities between our 2 adoptions. Obviously, they're both the same race. They're both one of 6 siblings. We know
Hmm.
nothing about either of their birth fathers. So they do have a lot of similarities. Of course, their birth moms are very, very different. But we did end up with quite a few similarities. We have open adoptions with both of them. Both of our kids have traveled to the states they were born in and visited with family. Both of their birth moms have come to visit us in Utah. Um, so it turned out that it's been very similar. That doesn't always happen, but um, as far as differences go, I mean, like I said, their birth moms are very different. Navigating our open adoptions is very different. The relationships, because of the relationships and the expectations between the relationships.
Hmm.
Um,
What do you mean by
I
that?
think just so afterwards, I don't know about other families, but I'm assuming yes. But you becoming a mom, you take on this, like, I don't know, like you're so thankful to the birth family, right? Like
Mm.
you feel it, like they made you a mom and you have this incredible child. And so you almost always feel indebted to them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these women, like I said, don't come from stability. So I
Mm-hmm.
think even after placement, there's times where they'll reach out and ask for help, and whether that's financial or emotional or whatever. Navigating that afterwards can be tricky as well. Asking for money to help pay for bills or rent, or to keep their phone on or whatever. So I've experienced that with both of our birth families, and it's tricky to navigate, but I think you have to really kind of set those boundaries up early. And even with boundaries, sometimes it's still tricky.
Yeah.
So our relationships that way, just financial instability and things like that varies with our birth families. And so that's hard too, because you want them to be loved and safe and have a roof over their head and have a phone to use and all of that. But you also have to take care of their child that they chose to place with you, right? You have to have the funds to do that too. So it's tricky. So our relationships are different in
Do,
regards to like,
do your kids feel that difference?
they don't.
Okay.
Um, Neither one of them really ask much about that at this point.
Okay.
So they're 10 and 12, but I'm sure they will in the future. But no, they don't really ask, and they don't really reach out to them directly at this point. They both have their numbers like in their cell phones and all of that, but they just don't really communicate. I think that there will come a time, especially
Mm-hmm.
in the next couple of years, where they'll reach out more and want to have that closer connection. But right now we haven't had to deal with that too much. So I don't have too much experience in that quite yet. But I think those are the biggest differences. But I would say it doesn't really matter either. I think that having unique stories is part of the process, and for them to each have their own story and have those unique differences is
Yeah.
perfect, right? That's their story. That's what makes them them, and what makes everything unique about their story. So I think they don't have to match, right? Nothing has to match in adoption. And I think just being open to that too, because and kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for too, right? So, well, we have to act like their mom sent this gift because this mom sent this other kid a gift, and blah blah. And just be open and honest with them about it, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think when they're ready for it, I think you don't need to give them more than they're ready for. But if somebody sent a present and the other one didn't, that's okay. You can have a conversation about it. Like, maybe that birth family is more secure than the other financially, or it doesn't mean there's less love. It doesn't mean, so you can have those conversations. But I think those are the things that families get caught up in,
Mm-hmm.
is possibly openness. Maybe one family has a very open adoption and the next one wants closed. And that's tricky to tell your kids, like, yeah, you can talk to your birth family and you can't, right? But that's not our choice either. That's the choice of the birth family, and we have to respect that. And I think we just have to be there for our kids and support them. We're loving them equally. It doesn't take away from our love for our children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their stories are unique, and that's okay. But I think just being open with your kids and just not trying to hide it, not trying to sneak presents so they each have equal presents or whatever,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I think just be open about it, because the truth will come out eventually. And I think the more open we are with our kids, the better our relationships will be as they navigate those, tricky parts of the adoption that are to come with
Yeah.
birth families in the future. Yeah.
100%. I mean, speaking of nothing being the same, you guys are different races. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
what do you call that? Because like
Uh,
the typical what we use a lot is transracial adoption. Do you call it transracial adoption?
I say we're a transracial family.
Transracial family. I've also heard
Mm-hmm.
interracial, mixed race family.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious what you use. So
Yeah.
how do you navigate the complexities that come with that, especially living in a state that's predominantly white? I guess most of our
Mm-hmm.
states are predominantly white, but your community.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still navigating the complexities. Every day is a new adventure,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So I don't have it all figured out by any means. I'm constantly trying to do what I can, but it's tricky. There's some days and months and years that are trickier than others, right? But I think just making sure, like you said, we live in a predominantly white community. I try to look for schools that are more diverse for our kids to go to, Black barbers and beauticians for hair care. Just honestly, like, we have a pretty big refugee community in Utah, and so we're able to kind of be a part of some of that. But but it's tricky. It's not an everyday thing. There'll be days where they'll be the only white person that they'll see that day, right? Or sorry,
Mm-hmm.
the only Black person in the area for that day. Um, and so like in our neighborhood, there are no other Black families. And it's predominantly white for blocks, so that is difficult. And I think just making sure that when I can provide those mirrors, I do, right? So we're always kind of going out seeking all those opportunities, and celebrating Black History Month, and making sure we go to the activities and all the things that are out there, Martin Luther King Day. And so it's not every day that I'm able to find those mirrors for them, but when I can, I'm taking advantage of it as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible. And also just talking to them about it, being really open about it. I mean, honestly, I talk about moving all the time. So we're in a more diverse community and more diverse state. And both of my kids are like, no, we don't want to move. They're at that age where I'm like, yeah, but, and they're like, nope, we don't care. So right now
Yeah.
they're not feeling it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I still try to make it happen as much as possible, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And I think that's why I say when families, aren't sure they can do it and they don't have enough mirrors for their kids, then great, good for you for knowing that. And that's important. So if you can't make that happen, then I know, you shouldn't be moving forward with a child outside of your race. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's complex for sure. And every day is just a challenge, and I have to just look for what I can when I can, really. But
What are some
it,
ways your kids have navigated that complexity?
um, you know, I think because it's predominantly white and they're used to that, they don't, it's not that they don't see race, obviously they do, but I think it's only starting right now at 10 and 12 that they're really starting to see the differences and really
Mm-hmm.
starting to notice that they're one of few. And so I think that's starting, just actually as of this year. I think both of them have definitely experienced more racism um, in the last year. And I think that's just age wise. People are, I don't know, kids are cruel at this age too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so now all the racism stuff is kind of starting. I mean, we've had bits here and there, but being really open and talking about it. And they can reach out to birth families and siblings and
Mm-hmm.
aunts and uncles and talk with them about their experiences too if they want to. So just navigating that and helping put those things in place for when they're ready. But I mean, I go and I talk to the principal, I go and I talk to the teachers, and I'm constantly advocating for them.
Yeah.
And there's studies out there that Black children are singled out and they're in trouble more. And they're, when a Black child and a white child do the exact same thing in the classroom, guess who everyone's looking at? The Black
Mm-hmm.
child, right? And so, I mean, there's studies that say that Black children are in trouble more, especially Black boys.
Yeah.
So I think just advocating too. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly advocating and constantly kind of mother bearing out all the time.
You are.
I try to reel it in a little bit, but yeah, I think just making sure that you can be an advocate for your child too,
Yeah.
whenever you need to, which will be often if you're in
What's
a
been one of
predominantly
the,
white community.
yeah, totally. What's been one of the most difficult lessons you've learned as a mom of two adopted children?
Um, I think just navigating the trauma that's there regardless, right? Just the trauma of adoption in general. And knowing that I think my children need to be parented differently than maybe biological children born to their parents because of the trauma. And I think learning how to work through that and just learning the correct way to discipline them and not spark trauma, like not reignite
Mm-hmm.
trauma that lies within them. And it's kind of hard to explain until you're in it, but we use the TBRI method. It's trust-based relational intervention. And so, and I'm constantly sharing that with like teachers and principals and all of that too, because it really does come down to the relationship that they have. When somebody, one of my kids is blowing up and flipping out about something, if I come at them at the same level, right? Like I'm also freaking out, then they're going to continue to rise and rise and rise. But if I'm able to maintain a calm composure and just talk to them and try to keep my cool, then I can bring them down really quickly. And I'm sure, and here's the cool thing is that this works with all children, right? It doesn't just work with adopted children, but it works especially well with any children with trauma. So foster children or anyone with trauma, but you can use it with your biological children as well. So it's definitely something to look into, but there's great books on it, great resources. In fact, most states have online classes that you can take too. But
awesome.
super helpful. I think that's been the most helpful thing and a game changer for us in regards to parenting.
That's awesome. And we'll link some information about TBRI in the show notes. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it's reminding me, I just had a conversation with an attachment coach. She's an expert in attachment, Sarah Cole. She's a coach, and I did an interview with her, and she talked a lot about how she knew she needed to parent her children differently, and so she went through this training. I don't think it was TBRI. It was a different method, which she shares in the podcast episode, which I will also link to. So check that out. But yes, parenting our children is often different when it's through adoption, and there, especially if there's been, outward trauma.
Right.
Open adoption. Why do you think it's crucial? And how does it play out in your family? I mean, you talked a little bit about the relationships and how they're different, but why do you think open adoption is so crucial?
I don't think your child should ever have to wonder about why they're here, how they got here, why they're in your family. There should never be a question. Even if your birth family chooses to not have an open adoption, you can still be open with them about their adoption, right? Doesn't mean that you have to have actual contact back and forth, which is ideal if possible. But even if you can't, you can have an open adoption with your child in regards to making sure that they have all the information from day one. But yeah, I never want my kids to wonder. I want them to, if they have a, stupid DNA project about whose nose they have or whatever, I want them to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, whose nose do I have? Or who do I look like? Or who's this? Or who's that? So that they can always be a part of anything that happens as well. They don't have to be singled out, right? Because they're adopted. So, but I think they should be able to ask the questions too. Like, why are you parenting this many children and not me? And that's an important question. And I can answer it, but it's more important for it to come from their birth family and for them to be able to share that story with their child.
Yeah.
So I just think it's that secrets are the reason that there were so many adopted kids in treatment centers years ago, right? Like full of adopted children because they didn't know, they just thought they weren't wanted, right? They were just thrown away in a sense. And that's how they felt. And they didn't know anything. So not knowing who you are or where you came from or anything about your story really leaves a hole, I think, in the child.
Yeah.
That we can fill as adoptive parents by trying to navigate an open adoption. And again, that looks different for everybody and not every birth family wants that. But if they do want that, then that's a blessing to you as an adoptive family to be able to take that information and have that relationship and be able to share that with your child. I think it's priceless.
It helps them live in reality and not fantasy of a better life somewhere else. That's just one of the many reasons. Also, how do you help your families navigate a healthy open adoption relationship with, after they've adopted, or what do you, what advice do you give them as they are about to navigate an open adoption?
And I think it does become tricky when there's longer matches to have open adoption before you have that relationship, right? Before the child is placed with a family. I think open adoption can be a little more tricky in the beginning to navigate while they're pregnant. But I also think it's maybe they want an open adoption right now and maybe in a year they disappear and you don't talk to them,
That's true.
Again for years and years. So this is your chance to learn as much as you can about them, to gather that information for your child, to be able to pass on to your child. And maybe they don't want an open adoption at all. So now is your time to get what you can as well, just to share. And that doesn't have to be having direct communication if they don't want that, right? It can be, and that's great if it is, but just making sure you get to know them so you can pass that on to your child. But I think you've got to respect whatever level of communication the birth family wants. And at the same time, you can say, like, I know right now you don't want any contact, and we 100% respect that. If you change your mind, please know that we're here and we would love to have more contact if you choose that later. So I think a lot of birth families might be nervous to reach out if they initially chose a closed adoption or very little contact. So I think making sure that they know, especially after placement, that you're open to it if they change their mind, because I think that's really great for you, your child, and for the birth family if they choose to come back around. And they might need a couple of years to grieve and to get back on their feet and jump back into life before they reach out. And there's no, right way to navigate that. I think just being open and being able to support the birth family's wishes and whatever that is. But if they do want to open adoption, then see that as a treasure, right? And gather as much information as you can and write it all down. And it's just going to be invaluable for your children, especially if you do lose contact eventually.
Yeah. And hopefully you won't, but I find that it's very common for there to be seasons of communication, especially on the side of the birth mom, that you might have direct contact and then suddenly she might disappear. And maybe that's because it's too hard for her emotionally, or there's many different reasons, right? And then they might come back into your life. And so just to keep that door open, seasons change. Just because things are one way now might change later. And also it might mean putting some healthy boundaries in place as you navigate the relationship, depending on what it is, and what that relationship looks like. So, Rachel, thank you so much. We dropped a ton of golden nuggets here today about working with a consultant and what that looks like and how to be a good client, and just about transracial and open adoption. We kind of covered a little bit of all of it. But before I let you go, I do have a quick fire round. If you've been listening to my podcast, you might know that, but we're going to start with giving a shout out. I want you to give a shout out to one person or organization that has influenced your adoption journey or the work you're doing in adoption.
Well, I would give a shout out to Heart to Heart Adoptions in Utah. They're my first adoption job, and I learned a lot there. I feel like my lessons were invaluable, just learning how to work with all sides of the triad and just growing that passion for adoption, I think, came from that first job.
What's one piece of advice you would like to share with adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents?
I would say just trust the process. Whether that's an awesome match or a fall through, just trust the process and just know that ultimately you will end up with the baby that's supposed to be with you. Just trust, and just trust us. Move along with us.
What's one thing you wish every adoptive parent knew before they brought their child home?
That's a hard one. I would say just that with all adoption comes some trauma. So being trauma informed and learning what that means for your child for the future.
Finally, describe adoption in 3 words.
Okay. I would say loving, difficult, and rewarding.
Adoption is not just a destination. It's a journey filled with love, resilience, and growth. Wherever you are on this roadmap, trust in your path, stay open to learning, and always lead with your heart. You already have everything you need to create a beautiful story for your family. And when the road takes unexpected detours, I'm here to help you navigate every turn along the adoption roadmap. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.